Hey, Buddy Manning here, Noah Dalzell, alongside after the Celtics beat the Magic 120-89 and slammed the door shut on this series with a massive second half and the three-point breakout we were waiting for at some point here. They were finally going to start shooting threes, or hitting threes rather, shooting threes as well.
Shooting threes too. Only 6 attempts in the first half.
They did it after halftime, but I didn't expect how it was going to happen. Where they're down 2 at half, Paolo picks up 2-3 quick fouls into the third quarter, ends up off the floor, and the Magic, obviously you would have expected they'd crumble offensively, but their defense fell apart too, and the Celtics just unleashed in the fourth quarter, and this thing was over just a couple minutes into the fourth when Paolo came back.
Yeah, that second half was the first time we've seen that Celtics offensive machine this entire series, and they found ways to win even though they never had that barrage of three-pointers land. But man, you could feel that this building, I think the team, the bench, even us sitting on press row, it's like there was so much, they were due for one of these big runs, and finally they got one. And it started with Paolo picking up those fouls, and it ended with them hitting, I think, 8 of 12 threes at a certain point.
Would it have happened anyway?
If he hadn't, probably yes, because honestly, once the threes started falling, I don't know how much it had to do with what Orlando was doing. Obviously, defensively, it changes what they're able to do. More than anything, it was a moment of absolute deflation for the Magic.
Oh.
Beyond it, Paolo's amazing, and he's the focal point of everything that they do. So just him going to that bench, you looked at that Orlando team, at that point it was still a tied game, and they just looked demoralized. So that was probably the biggest impact of him getting in foul trouble, more so than even what he does on the floor.
Yeah, and it could have happened anyway. I felt like I was at their shoot-around this morning. There was a general feeling of, we competed hard, let's compete hard again. But we've done what we need to do in this series already to this point. Now, Mosley was very frustrated after the game, Jamal Mosley, about that foul call. He challenged it unsuccessfully. I feel like the call was fine. Maybe a little soft for how the series has been officiated, but if you're calling that on the floor, there's nothing on video that can overturn that. So that was standing, I think, no matter what.
Well, that's the whole problem with challenges, is that anything you challenge is going to be a foul upon review, because it is a foul, but they let stuff go all the time. And I thought the whistle was so inconsistent tonight for both teams. The times where they did blow the whistle, I was like, there's marginal contact. And then there were other times where somebody literally shoved somebody else on purpose and they just let that go. So again, Magic, Celtics, I know Magic fans are not going to be happy after the officiating with this one. Celtics fans weren't happy after a few of these games. Was it lopsided? I don't know. I think officials just did not know how to referee the series because of just how physical it was, and how there was moments tonight where it's Tatum got fouled 4 times until they finally had to blow the whistle.
Yep.
So I don't know that you can really be a Magic fan and be super upset about that foul, because you did get away with a lot in this playoff round. But despite that, I thought the Celtics kind of met that physicality ultimately, and they were able to withstand it, and they were able to win in a way that was completely different than any other time they've won this season.
Yeah, and Tatum led the way. He kept them in the first half with a 16. No one else scored double figures rather in that first half, and they probably would have trailed by 8 points at least if he didn't score what he scored in that first half, especially at the end of the half where he put up 4 straight over the final 30 seconds there. You mentioned the possession where he got bumped a couple times, kept going downhill, got fouled on that play, shot 11 free throws in this one for the 3rd straight game, and scored 35 for the 3rd straight game as well after the wrist injury there. That was one of the biggest questions of the series, how that would impact him and how long he would miss. He missed 1 game, they won it, then he came back and was brilliant for the next 3 while getting covered one-on-one with tough defense. So the best takeaway from this series by far is that at the height of competition, the best defense you could imagine seeing, he was still able to be his best.
Yeah, and they have at least 3 days off now. I think the earliest they can play Saturday. Obviously, Knicks did not take care of business in their Game 5, and that puts the Celtics in a better position. They're kind of tiring themselves out. But last year, I felt like when they had those long breaks, it was do they really even want them? You kind of wanted to keep going. They need this break. Between Jalen's knee and Jalen's finger, he had ice everywhere in the locker room post-game. I mean, he was literally everything. He
didn't look good tonight.
I couldn't even figure out what he was icing. But they could use this time. I think Tatum kind of hinted to this last game, but the wrist injuries may be more serious than we realized. Obviously, it kept him out of a playoff game, that's a pretty big indication. Drew Holiday misses his 3rd consecutive game with the right hamstring strain, so they needed to take care of business. They did not want to go back to Orlando for Game 6. I did not want to go back to Orlando for Game 6, and this was a really, really important game.
I kind of want to go back. But regardless, do you feel better about them coming out of this series given that they persevered through this, or do you feel worse given the bumps and bruises that they accumulated and that the Magic did hold them down and make them play their style for pretty much the entirety of the series up until the second half tonight?
I feel better about the fact they were able to withstand playing in a completely different style. We never really knew how they would look in a series where they're barely getting up threes, and ultimately they blew out the Magic in 2 of their 4 wins. They lost 1 game, and it was by 2 points, and it was with an abysmal third quarter. I feel worse in the sense that I'm worried about Drew Holiday because we have no information about what happened to his hamstring, and he is so important and perhaps more important than even we realize. And we're big fans of Drew Holiday here, but seeing how different this team looked in games 3, 4, and 5, first half of Game 5 versus Games 1 and 2, and I asked Jamal Mosley about it pregame, and he said it's majorly different preparing for this team without Drew, and I worry a little bit about him moving forward. So maybe before this round, he was completely healthy, so that's like the one thing that is kind of in the back of my mind.
Especially if it lingers, and that kind of injury does linger, even if he is able to get back for the next series. It's just another thing that's going to be there, I think, for a lot of this run, I would imagine, depending on how much time he misses here. Maybe he misses more time than we think and can get close to being himself. They can obviously win without any number of these guys. They showed that in this series. And you came out of this one feeling not as great about certain players. Porzingis at least broke out of those struggles at times. This wasn't a great one for him again here. Pritchard's an interesting one because he was so great to start this, and then the scoring just disappeared for about 5 halves. And the finish to this game was awesome for him. I think you found other ways that you could see him succeed, specifically on defense, as we talked about with him after this game. So you feel better about him coming out of this one, but you probably feel a little worse about Hauser, and you definitely feel a little worse about Luke.
Yeah, probably. I honestly think I actually feel better about Pritchard than I expected to after a round because I thought defensively
I agree.
He exceeded expectations, and I've been monitoring his defense all year. I did a story on it earlier in the season. I had a very memorable moment when I interviewed him earlier in the year where I said, I was after the OKC game, and I said, how much pride do you take when teams hunt you? Because obviously you're not the guy that Joe puts on SGA, but when you put him on him, and he cut me off and said, I want to be that guy. I want to be the guy that they put on SGA, and I want to be the guy that you put on opposing stars. I thought in this series, every time Franz and Paolo tried to target him, he not only held his own, but they didn't want to do it anymore. And at one point, you could tell that was not something that they were going for. And considering the fact that, you look at the other Celtics defenders, the fact that they moved away from targeting him said a lot about what he was able to do. Offensively, I thought he was good in 3 out of the 5 games. You'll probably take that, honestly. So I know it was a hype type discussion how in games 3 and 4 he was really non-existent offensively, and that's absolutely true. But I think big picture in those 5 games, I actually felt better about him than I expected, or at least around where we expected. But you're right. I think Porzingis was the one guy that you walk away wondering if this is very matchup specific or if this is playoff physicality that's going to carry over to other teams.
Even in this game, missing over Corey Joseph. It was a weird one.
He was in his head this series. I think he just needs a new scenery, honestly.
He needs a new series, and matchups will change. I think the Knicks matchup, if it's going to be that one's better for a lot of guys up and down this roster, and I think many of their players will fare better in that series. But I said it on the show. The one thing I feel worse about coming out of this series, aside from the injuries, which are just obvious, the Thunder matchup looks all that more daunting because they do all these things that Orlando does at an even higher level. And you got to get there. They have to get there. But I do look ahead to that and think maybe you could benefit from seeing something like that early on. But it's a kind of team, it's a style that is going to really challenge them later.
Yeah, I think defensively there are similarities between these two teams, but Oklahoma City gives you open threes.
Yep.
And this
62
team,
of them in that last game.
Right. So that's a massive, massive difference. We have not seen another team even scratch the surface of what Orlando did as far as taking away the three-point shot. I'm curious if we're going to see teams attempt it because they liked what they saw, or if we're going to see teams realize that they do not have the personnel for it, so they're not even going to try, or they're going to realize they did it and they still lost in 5 games, so maybe it wasn't as great as maybe it looked. So I don't know that it changes my perception on Oklahoma City too much because their styles are so different. Certainly, we had those Oklahoma City games as a standalone moments where you saw how their defense can shut down the Celtics offense at
Did you
points.
watch that Memphis series?
Yeah, but the same way with talking about the Cavs, the Celtics, the Oklahoma City's dominance and
Memphis is in the
the
Heat.
Cavs yeah, but I was not a believer of what happened to that team down the stretch. They didn't. Again, the big fact about Memphis is that they didn't beat an above 500 team in the last 2 months of the season. So I'm not overly impressed. I'm impressed by Oklahoma City and Cleveland as what they did during the regular season. I didn't learn anything about them in the playoffs first round. We'll see what happens here in the next round when they play a real playoff team.
Well, second round's coming up, and if you want to be there this weekend, I believe it'll start. Maybe if there's a Game 7, it'll start early next week, but your tickets are on Game Time. Go over there and check out the app. All-in pricing lets you know what you're going to pay ahead of time, as well as a panoramic view of your seat, which is my favorite feature on there. There's concerts coming up. Kendrick's here in just a couple weeks. I'm excited about that. And those tickets are on Game Time as well. Comedy, baseball, hockey playoffs. If your town's there, there's no Bruins in this building, but there's a bunch of great events coming up on the Game Time app along with Celtics games. So go over there and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase over on the Game Time app. What time is it? Game time. So let's look ahead. Pistons, Knicks. Pistons won tonight. They keep my Detroit dream alive, but I'm in on the Knicks. How could I not be? The hype, we didn't get it last year, and there's just such a great atmosphere in that MSG playoff environment that I want to see here. So everyone's going to agree on that, but I don't think the series will be good. I think the Celtics killed them during the regular season. I don't think the coach matches up with Joe Mazzulla here. And those two defensive targets between Jalen Brunson and Karl Towns, I think, just leave massive holes on that defense. Now, if Drew's out to start that series, things change. If Porzingis continues to struggle, that changes some things too here. But I feel really good about Boston against the Knicks.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see Porzingis pop a lot more against that team. Like, that's how he killed them in the regular season with his threes. I don't think they have the personnel to really do a ton about that. But, yeah, I think either way, I expect them to move. I would probably pick Celtics in 5, regardless of who the matchup is. I have to think about it a little bit more, but upon first instinct.
Detroit reminds me a little bit of Orlando.
And I had Orlando in 5, the reason I don't want Detroit.
Celtics in 5.
Yeah, Celtics in 5. I think the reason I don't want Detroit is because I kind of want something stylistically very different. Just because
you don't want to watch this again?
Was a fun series, and it had some fun moments for sure, and it was more interesting than
I
expected.
fights? There'll be more fights against Detroit.
There really weren't many fights. I was waiting for a fight.
There was a fight in every game until the night.
Barely. Those aren't fights. I thought we were going to see a real fight after what John said, but ultimately, it was fun. It was fun, but I had enough in these 5 games, and I'm ready for some Madison Square Garden, Jalen Brunson, ISO. I want a different style here. So I picked New York. I think probably the NBA and ESPN and TNT are all hoping for Knicks Celtics. But it'll be a really good series regardless. And there's a lot of compelling stuff with this Pistons team and how they're kind of turning things around. So we'll find some intrigue regardless. But I think
they got screwed though in Game 4. I mean,
yeah,
there would have been
happens.
a much better chance of them actually facing the Celtics here if they didn't get that no call on Tim Hardaway there in that Game 4. So
maybe he would have missed all of his free throws.
Maybe. I like Detroit's matchup against them though. Cade presents that scoring threat on the other side that Orlando obviously had in Paolo. You have some secondary scoring there from Malik Beasley.
He would be the next villain, by the way. He would be the next KCP if that's the series.
Yeah, and that's the tricky thing for me. I think about this for us, right? Interest, intrigue, how good are these games? There's there's a real edge to that Detroit team. There's a personality to them that even though you have bigger stars on that Knicks team, Cat and Brunson and all the way down the line, everyone knows Tibbs, right? There's really not a ton of personality there. There's better players, there's bigger stars, but you mentioned Beasley, Beef Stew, ready to fight everybody.
Hey, Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart have a very entertaining podcast.
They're entertaining.
I think you're underrating their. Josh Hart has a good personality. He's entertaining.
I like Hart. I had a good conversation with him earlier this year, but I think the Pistons would draw more ire from the fan base, and that was what was so great about this series. I know you didn't like the basketball, but there was so much
basketball
intrigue.
was okay. I enjoyed it for this round, and I'm ready for a new style. That's all.
So Celtics in 5 either way?
I think so. I'll have to think about it a little bit more, and I'm going to lock into this Game 6 and really focus on these two teams. But I think Celtics in 5.
Well,
it's hard for me to pick Celtics in 6 because since I started covering the team, it's never taken 6 games. So it's unless I'm like, wow, this team is so formidable, I don't want to pick Celtics in 6 because so far every series has gone to 5.
Yeah, and Detroit is a little beat up right now too. Jaden Ivey's been out a while. Stewart missed the last handful of games in this series for them. The Knicks are healthy, I'd say. Brunson keeps getting banged up, but
he plays through it.
He plays through it, and he's played through it well. And he is deadly. He really got going in that last game. And I guess if you're going to project some competitiveness for the Knicks in this series, that last game was a battle. It went to overtime. Kristaps had a crazy shot at the end. Tatum's had to do heavy lifting in these games. And they can score with the Celtics. And there's two schools of thought, obviously, right? You can defend them at the highest level like the Magic did here, but they couldn't score enough. And this Magic series, I think we compare it to the Pacers one a little bit. It was short, but it was so competitive. And I do have a tough time picking which one was tougher, because the Pacers could actually keep up with them and build leads and make it challenging going up and down. The Knicks can do that. They just can't defend at all, which makes it tough to sustain some of their runs.
Yeah, it's stylistically complete opposites, but I think ultimately, like, the Celtics offense is so lethal that unless you have the personnel to match up with it, like, it is going to be really hard for you. And I know you're really confident in the Celtics' chances against the potential Knicks team, but it's hard to not be when you think about just how much there is to exploit in that defense. Like, that's, like we talk about, what do they call the killer whale offense?
Yep.
And how it's really about just hunting the weakest link on these teams. And that was what they didn't have. Orlando just didn't have a weak link. It was Cole Anthony for the 3-minute stints that he played, but they really didn't have it. And so I think you'll see them be able to do that with ease. I just think that the Knicks and the Celtics have been good for enough time now that they need to match up in a playoff series. The trade will happen eventually too, but it feels like this is a little overdue.
Yeah, and that came into play again tonight. They target Paolo twice early in that third quarter. They did find some weaknesses on the Orlando side, whether it was those couple Cole Anthony minutes that sprinkled in throughout the series, going after Joseph at times. Tatum did that well, and then you had Jalen inflicting about two of the most massive plays you can think of in terms of series-changing plays. This could have been a series that went back to Orlando if that doesn't happen. We'll never know, but it did, and the Celtics turned this into a Geno time kind of night and ran away with this game. A bunch of guys got going. Brown late. Hauser was awesome in the second half. Pritchard had some ginormous plays, and the defense we talked to him about as well. So stay tuned for that interview that Noah and I did tonight. And all our coverage over on CLNS Media. Noah's work is over at CelticsBlog.com and the You Got Boston podcast here on CLNS. All the post-game reaction, including Mosley, who was very unhappy about that Paolo call, and understandably so. A tough end for that Magic team that really battled in the series. And Celtics fans grew to hate them, but you have to respect what they did here.
I don't think the Celtics grew to hate them, for what it's worth. So if you're a Celtics fan,
Celtics, depends who.
I don't think Tatum and Brown hate them.
Horford?
I don't know. He seems like I think he just gets very competitive in the moment. But you saw Jalen tonight. He said nothing but respect for this Magic team. Were they a little bit dirty? You can answer that for yourself. I think they pushed the limits. There were definitely some moments, but they were a fun team to compete against. I think that the Celtics enjoyed kind of what it brought out of them too.
Well, that's it for us here at the Garden. We'll have a post-game show if the Knicks win, and that's going to be the series on Thursday. They'll play the Pistons in Detroit on Thursday night. If not, it'll be a Game 7 this weekend, and there'll be an even longer layoff for Jrue Holiday, Tatum with that wrist, and Brown as he continues to battle through the knee injury here through the first round of the playoffs, where the Celtics earned themselves some amount of extra rest before round 2. For Noah Dalzell, I'm Bobby Manick. Celtics beat the Magic 4-1 in the first round, and we'll have more coverage of the playoffs as it continues here on CLNS Media and Celtics All Access.